There we go.
Well,
Uh,
Samson's going to be 22 in May, so she's still going strong. The tortoise, Samson.
oh yeah, no. I got that when you said it. I mean, I had
Hmm.
like a second delay, but yeah, and then I got it. So
Hmm.
yes, I do remember the tortoise. Tortoises live to like insane ages, right?
Yeah, she's probably going to outlive me, so she will have to be taken care of as like in a will as if she was a child. But she's doing great. I've had her for coming up on 19 years, so
Yeah. I see. I'm not inclined to have any pets. I don't know.
a small human is plenty of work. So it seems like it's a one or the other thing. Like I don't get the households that can juggle much more than that. That's not my speed. So
Yeah. But I mean, I grew up with a dog and a cat, so it's not like I haven't been around pets. But now I'm just like, man, I can't be bothered with that.
you're a busy person.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm a busy person. I don't need a cat around. There's cats outside if I want to see a cat. Cats wandering the neighborhood. I see those cats.
Yeah.
Okay, let's bump on into two then. Let me get my trivia where I can see it properly. Okay. Welcome to Time Enough Podcast. It's where we delve into episodes of The Twilight Zone and beyond. This is Matt here. As far as we're recording, we're doing a twofer. Dorian Bowen's back. Hi, Dorian.
Hello.
Of course, you do lots of film archival stuff, and you know all the black and white images quite well. So
Hmm.
back in the day, I know that we put way too much analysis on all the screwball comedies of the 30s. So
No
uh,
such thing. No such thing as too much analysis or too many viewings.
yeah. Whereas this one doesn't really have any screwball at all today. So we're kind of doing the opposite. It's in the wrong decade. There's nothing screwball about two, which is the first episode of season 3 of the Twilight Zone. The first season, I can't talk today. The first episodes of season 1 and 2, of course, were like basically one actor shows. So now we're up to two. Uh, yeah, I don't know why that it's just it should have been last season, I guess, when they did that, but that's not what they did. So let me do a bit of the trivia here. Original air date was September 15th, 1961. This is a Montgomery Pittman jam. He wrote and directed the thing. He also helmed some episodes of Maverick and the Rifleman. Charles Bronson played Man, and you most likely know this man. He was a prime character actor in films such as The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, and The Dirty Dozen, and he fully Bronsoned out in the later Death Wish series. Elizabeth Montgomery played Woman. She was the daughter of some dude named Robert. Her career
Hmm.
has plenty of highlights. The last one, acting on Batman the Animated Series, voice acting on Batman the Animated Series. But she earned her place in the zeitgeist playing Samantha Stevens on Bewitched. We've got an original score for this one. Van Cleve composed this one, and he also served his services for the films Robinson Crusoe on Mars and White Christmas. He'd previously done a fair amount of top tier big banding. Okay. I have several typos in my trivia last night. I guess I was probably typing while hunched back in my chair. Should check my own notes before I read them. Let me bop onto the screen the prologue if you could give us a quick reading on that.
This is a jungle, a monument built by nature honoring disuse, commemorating a few years of nature being left to its own devices. But it's another kind of jungle, the kind that comes in the aftermath of man's battles against himself. Hardly an important battle, not a Gettysburg or a Marne or a Iwo Jima, more like one significant. Oops, I'm going to start over because I messed that up. Okay. This is a jungle, a monument built by nature honoring disuse, commemorating a few years of nature being left to its own devices. But it's another kind of jungle, a kind that comes in the aftermath of man's battles against himself. Hardly an important battle, not a Gettysburg or a Marne or an Iwo Jima, more like one insignificant corner patch in the crazy quilt of combat. But it was enough to end the existence of this little city. It's been 5 years since a human being walked these streets. This is the first day of the 6th year, as man used to measure time. The time, perhaps 100 years from now, or sooner, or perhaps it's already happened 2 million years ago. The place, the signposts are in English so that we might read them more easily, but the place is the Twilight Zone.
All right. 6 years in the Twilight Zone. That sounds like fun. So this episode for me, I guess with the actors involved, I just have like dissonance with both watching both Bronson and Montgomery in this one. Not that they're bad or anything. I'm just like Bronson. He was never that young. He's Death Wish 4. Not even 1, 2, and 3. My Bronson is straight to Death Wish 4. Where he's like, oh, like way too old to be doing that.
He
Or
has that
not.
old face already. I mean, it's you see it in there. He's pretty unmistakable.
He is, but it's just like him not actually being old is jarring for me. And then yeah, Elizabeth Montgomery with dark hair also throws me off a little bit. It's
That is
fun.
the thing, though. That happened in the late 50s. So 61 puts us like about 4 years before Bewitched starts. And of course, everybody knows her as blonde before and after, but I know for a fact that she had a brunette period because Dominic Dunn published a book in 1999 called The Way We Lived Then. And one of Dunn's first jobs in television was working for Robert Montgomery for the show. He was a stage manager, Robert Montgomery Presents. And so he became friends with the whole family, and there are lots of photos of her as a brunette in there. And that's also the period where she was married to Gay Young. So there was definitely a period of time for brunette, although it isn't what we're used to seeing her as.
And then she's kind of got the look, of like a late 60s like kind of militant or something, which is kind of cool. Like this is a few years early because she's got the boots, but like then eventually she's wearing a dress, right? So it's just kind of a
Mm-hmm.
an interesting precursor
Which
for a look.
she is a soldier. I mean, it seems like she has this distinctive patch that they focus on the back of her uniform. She's got that pistol holster, which doesn't have a pistol. It has her comb and her bobby pins and her compact. But the patch is sort of this like two ovals overlapping. It looks sort of like an atom. So, and she speaks Russian. Her one word of dialogue is in Russian. So it's interesting that it's not supposed to be a particular place or time, but that she is a Russian speaker.
Right. So and Bronson basically looks like an urban cowboy more or less, which makes sense for 1961 television, I suppose.
I read that the uniform that he's wearing is probably a leftover uniform from a Confederate film. So that sort of swirling pattern that he has on his sleeves is supposedly modeled after a Confederate uniform.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they would have had to put like a lot of thought into the uniforms because they're just using the basic back. They got two actors. They've just scuffed up the backlot a little bit, so you can really focus on like how these people are gonna look in this episode. So,
Mm-hmm.
whereas some episodes like put a suit on them, right? and that does the trick. I'm trying to think of what would be I guess the version of this now, well, the unfortunately the real version is now is going to be probably like a few cities in Ukraine or something. But I am thinking
Mm-hmm.
of the abandoned cities that have been on the public consciousness, which would be Pripyat, next to Chernobyl,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they're finally starting to kind of creep back into the coastal cities in Fukushima. I can't off the top of my head remember what the names were, but I did see a report like on NHK, Japan National TV, where with people going into the old city center that has been abandoned for more than 6 years. It's been 12 years, and has a similar look to this, except the signs are not in English; they're in Japanese. But I was just thinking, watch this episode. This looks really similar to the news report of the people that went into the Fukushima towns, just like a few months ago.
Hmm.
Because you see Pripyat, and that's all the like you see all the weird like kind. Well, I should say weird, the unfamiliar kind of Soviet trappings. Whereas for me, living in Japan so long, of course, this looks like a perfectly normal, overgrown town now. To an American, it still might look a little weird, but it would look closer because you got fast food and laundromats. So, but yeah, urban explorers, that's a big thing. You'll find YouTube videos of people going to like old malls or theme parks and getting blown away. Oh my god, this is where the Knights in White Satin, the trip ride used to be, man. They kind of overdo it on the YouTube video sometimes, but it's kind of fun. So
But this was very cost effective because they were just stomping around the MGM backlot. So
how did you feel about this being a pretty silent episode? Not so much as the invaders, which literally has no, well, almost no talking at all, or what's well, yeah, the King Nine and Where Is Everybody had a single actor who couldn't shut up, right? So now we got two who won't talk.
I liked it. I like, that script is a lot more complicated when you're describing the emotions and the movements of the performers as opposed to strictly dialogue. So I enjoyed that. I thought that was a thoughtful way to present it.
Yeah, and I'm also trying to think of how much post-apocalyptic sort of media, or especially movies, we had in 1961. Um, there's Shape of Things to Come, or Things to Come, or whatever it was in the 30s, which kind of gets to that. The British production, I think it
Mm-hmm.
was 38, 39, has a bit of this vibe when they show the 50 years down the line city that the scientists basically have to come and save, is
Mm-hmm.
sort of along these lines. That's interesting because it has a lot more people in it. Um, the other one that comes to mind is On the Beach, which I don't know if the I think maybe in '61 the book was out, but the movie wasn't or something. I don't
Mm-hmm.
quite
That's a
remember.
62. So it's very close in time.
Yeah. So and then both of them just slightly predating the Cuban Missile Crisis. So yeah, a different
Mm-hmm.
time, I guess.
The only thing I can think of is the time machine, but that goes much further. It goes to a different future that's not quite what we're talking about. But On the
Yeah,
Beach is a great example.
yeah, 6 years in a few million are definitely going to get you some different results there.
Mhm.
But what do you have in your notes?
Let's see. Of course, every time there was a marquee or a newspaper headline, I was writing that down. So, the movie theater marquee is advertising war news, actual films of enemy foot troops landing. And, you see through the media the sort of the acceleration, is that the right word, of things getting more serious. So the newspaper talks about the big bomb. It talks about how it was, vital to evacuate the city at that point. He looks at Universe magazine at some point. I love that, it was very vague what the dates were, and they tried to make it seem like this very universal city. And then they have movie posters for Furlough Romance at the theater. And this is a total aside, but I think IMDb says that the person on that poster is Shirley Temple, and I can kind of see it, but I thought they were sort of going for more kind of generic individuals, like they were, making this as widespread as possible. Is that the right word? What am I thinking? As generic as possible. That seems kind of mean, but
That makes sense. Actually, I was this is really deep in the weeds, but themed posters at Disneyland, which were originally made for it was one of their Hollywood section, and they had like a relatively generic actor, America's favorite leading man, America's favorite leading lady, but it was like advertising toilet paper, right? So it was kind of a joke. But then the sponsorship ended, so they took out that reference. So now you just have these baffling generic posters that don't actually make any sense. So it's like a mind paradox to think about it if you don't know where they originally came from. So that's kind of fun. But another two people. So
so I guess we should talk about how, it begins with just the woman and she's looking around and, she sort of seems like she's just come upon this town. She's exploring, she's seeing, she sees the the dress in the window, which comes back later. But then she sees that there's a restaurant, goes into there and finds food. And then as soon as she's trying to, get some food, Bronson appears in the doorway and she immediately starts pelting him with things in defense of herself. And he comes in, he smacks her on the ground, knocks her out, and then, takes her food, which is chicken legs in a can. Have you ever seen chicken legs in a can outside of this episode?
Um, just yesterday, actually, I was at the Donkey, which is a discount store in Japan, and they did have yakitori in a can. So
Okay, well, I'm jealous. I'd never seen that before, and it looked fantastic.
they had
Um,
oysters in a can, of course. Yeah, there's some weird stuff you could get in one section of that store. So, I mean, yakitori is not that weird, but you can definitely eat some disturbing things from the sea as well. Um,
there were sad little bird skeletons in the cages of that room. I thought that was very poignant, like whether or not they got blasted with the initial, or it seemed like they didn't, and they just sort of died slowly in the cages. So that was, unnecessarily tragic. But, they say that it's the first day of the sixth year, but the calendar that's on the wall in that first set of the restaurant is February. And it's actually it lines up with February 2023. Did you notice that?
okay. Oh, no, no, I didn't catch that. Okay.
So it was 1961's calendar, but also happens to work for 2023. So I thought that was
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty trippy. Sure, why not?
right.
I can get
Makes
into
it
that.
very, very real, very immediate. They both have different uniforms. Hers has this strange little patch on the back, and his has these. It's clear that they were on opposite sides of whatever this fight was, whatever this war was. That there's an immediate distrust they have of each other, which doesn't get better when they start fighting with each other. But so what happens next? He steals her food, he goes away, he looks at this dress, he looks at the magazines and the headlines, and then he sort of, has more compassion for her as a female in this situation, goes back, tries to revive her, dumps water on her to revive her, and then offers her food. And so then it's very perplexing to her what their relationship is, because he was an enemy and then now he's helping her. And so from that point on, she sort of trails him a little bit. Like, he's trying to communicate, he's trying to look around, and she's keeping a few steps behind because she doesn't quite know whether she can trust him. But you see the loneliness that they both have and how they are looking for a connection, but they're just so unsure if they can trust each other because they don't speak the same language, and they're enemies.
Yeah, it's like when you hear about them finding, like Japanese pilots that had been on like an island for 20 years after World War II and like didn't know the war was over. That
Right.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
mindset. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how that's the thing. It's like, well, I was told to go point a gun at this person and shoot at them. It's been so long, it doesn't seem to matter anymore. But I feel like that's still my last standing order. So, do I do that?
Mm-hmm. And then when after he revives her and he's trying to, he tries to initiate communication with her. He's like, we don't have to be enemies anymore. Like, whatever was then is not now. And he says the line, there are no more boundaries, governments, or noble causes. And that's really sad. But they find themselves in, without anyone else. And all of that has fallen away. And they're just two individuals that are sort of lost in this abyss.
With the amount of detail in this episode, they're still surrounded by the propaganda. So whoever city this is, especially, I mean, we don't if it's Bronson's home side or Montgomery's, right, man or woman's hometown. It's like, would the propaganda still affect you if you're surrounded by it, or does it look that stupid now? It's.
Well, then there's the scene where they're in the salon where they're cleaning up and he's shaving and he throws her a towel and she starts to wash up. And then when, she sees that dress and he's trying to, make this gesture and he's like, here, take this dress. This can be yours now. And she goes into change. And that's when she sees all the propaganda in that in that office, it's the recruitment office. That's where all that propaganda remains. And so, and then she sort of gets worked up, and then he's just minding his own business, waiting for her to change into the dress. And she comes out with a gun and she shoots him with that, whatever that laser gun effect was. It's not quite a bullet. It's just sort of zaps him, and then, again, disrupts the trust that they were building.
Yeah, I mean, I just when I was watching him, I noticed like, well, certainly the propaganda is not wearing her down this far into the apocalypse, but I guess it is. It's just like, oh, I remember my original mission now, which just seems a little silly at this point. So,
Or it was a trigger. I thought it was that she was in the enemy land. I thought those were, I think she was seeing those posters and saying, oh, well, that's his job. He's here and he's this destructive force. It's hard to know whose home it is. And that's another element that makes it, interesting, because there's not like one home team. They're both sort of alien in this world.
he's there to recruit people that show up just in case anyone shows up. Yeah. He's got lots of good plan for you. So the ending of this one is mildly, I don't know. How do we feel about the ending of this one? It seems that they're just kind of, oh, I guess we're hooking up now.
It's sort of this volley of trust the whole time. And so she shoots him, he goes away, and then she feels bad about it. She sort of sits on the ground and sort of is like, well, now what do I do now? I sort of got rid of my only friend. And then she makes the gesture to come and find him. So she comes with a vehicle, and she comes dressed in that dress with all the guns around, which I love that look. It's like a Western look of like the sort of tattered dress, but she's accepting of that gift. She brings him the vehicle to share, and he has seemed to find some sort of home, or it's hard to, I think there was a sign outside, I don't remember what it was, but he found food, and he found a suit that he was wearing. So he's foraged for food and supplies, and then and that seems to be like the olive branch, is her bringing that and saying, and coming back and saying like, hey, maybe we can do this together, non-verbally, of course. But so, and then it ends with, this has been a love story about two lonely people who found each other in the Twilight Zone. So it's a little fast. It goes through a lot of stages, and that distrust doesn't seem like it's just automatically done, but there is sort of this nice volley between them. And it seems like that final gesture of hers coming back to him is the one that says, all right, maybe we can move along together, and maybe this is the beginning of time when we don't have to be alone anymore.
Yeah. I don't know if we had maybe one of them should have been horribly ugly. We see how that works out. I mean, Bronson looks rough, but I guess he's a nice ragged rough. There we go. Okay.
There you are. I thought you were very intently listening. It turned out that you'd frozen.
There's a little bit of both, I guess. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No,
And also I should mention. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just like, I don't know if it froze before or after I said. I was like, what if one of them was just like horribly ugly? I don't know, because she's kind of like Che Guevara's manic pixie dream girl, and a younger Bronson is at least ruggedly handsome. So
That's true. They could have done it. They could have done like the Enchanted Cottage, where the people are only beautiful in the eyes of each other, and not really, objectively beautiful in the world, or handsome and rugged in the world. But and that's another thing, is her one word is, I don't know if I can pronounce it properly. It's Russian, and it is prokrasky or procrans. I'm not going to say it right.
I saw you put it in writing. I was like perfectly happy not to try saying it.
We could just put it in the description, but that Russian word is the one that she uses to describe the dress, and at the end, it's the one that he says to her when she's wearing the dress. So I think that's another part of the ceiling of the relationship, or at least the potential of the relationship, is that they're both making these sort of tentative steps toward being a companion to one another. So I think that even though she only has one word of dialogue, the fact that that's repeated back to her, and that he's able to pick up that that is one thing that he knows she'll understand, I think that's a kind of poignant and sweet way to end it.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I guess I will start doing a few of the questions here. The first, of course, being who exactly in this episode went into the Twilight Zone. You only get two choices.
um, I'm gonna say the birds on this one. I think they went to the Twilight Zone as their skeletons remain in the cages, but you know,
I
that's
just
my
got
answer.
I just got a Twitter thread or something that if people just suddenly disappear, I think it's 10 days for all the domesticated animals to be dead.
Mm-mm.
So
That's
6 years in, 10 days and then less than 6 years. That's perfectly enough time to become a little bird skeleton, I
it
suppose.
absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think either of them are. They're in like again, there aren't supernatural elements to this one. This is all man-made destruction. So I don't think of it as particularly trippy on the trippy meter. I think of it as just sort of this cautionary tale that is very grounded in reality, things we have seen and things that we hopefully won't ever see.
Yeah, I guess we're jumping around. We can give a we can think about the tripometer now that's been evoked. I actually, yeah, I was thinking, what do I want to give this? Because, like you said, there's nothing supernatural and there's nothing particularly trippy. It would just be like the propaganda posters and the weird little newspaper headlines, which that's enough for me to give it a two, I guess. But yeah, um,
The recruitment sign on the outside of the recruitment office, by the way, the place where she goes to change into the dress but doesn't, does have a sign that says men and women of all ages were wanted for the war effort. So
they need everybody. Yeah. So,
all
but
ages.
also, how could you not give the episode two a two? I mean, you don't have to. I was just like, wonder if that's why I was going with that.
Maybe that's it.
So I now that we're like tangling the questions a bit, I guess we're going to go on the page that nobody went into the Twilight Zone except the birds. Is that where we're landing?
That's my answer. Yeah, I think, none of the characters that we're visiting with are there. It's sort of the rest of the world has left them behind.
Exactly. Well, or the rest of the world has passed away. So it's very like we don't really know what they've been up to for those 6 years. Have they actually just been by themselves for how long? 2 years, 3 years, all six of them? I mean, it's kind of hard to figure out. Like, I both of them were clearly in the military, so at least they were
And it's
involved.
unclear if this is just a town they're traveling through. I mean, this could be one small stop on a 6 year walkabout of the destroyed areas. So, the fact that they just took for granted that that water was okay to use, or, I mean, the sealed food, I kind of understand that part, but, that the water thing kind of tripped me out. Like, what, is that safe? Like, would you put that on your face? Like, what
Is
depends
there
on
any other option?
I guess that's what it comes down to. I guess that's a good point.
Yeah, so sometimes with the Twilight Zones, I'm like, part of the fun is that you do just get this 25-minute window, but at the same time, you're missing a lot of context as to my normal question two, which is now question three, which is do they deserve their trip? I guess they're not going through the Twilight Zone, but I feel like we have to focus on them for do they deserve this experience?
I get it's sort of like, with the obsolete man, like their experience has been thrust upon them. So I think the question is like, have they done a good job with what they've been handed? And I think that the fact that they went from being two individuals to, finding a sense of humanity in each other makes it a positive story.
I mean, yeah,
Makes it
for me to headcanon this a bit. Hell, you know what? We could just like let's go ahead and just headcanon as a straight up sequel to the Obsolete Man, and that both of these were the brown shirt growling people from the Obsolete Man. They went to war, and now we're 6 years down the line, and you start at this point, they're finally becoming a little bit more deprogrammed
I can buy that.
because her especially, like you said, she's in the recruitment office. She sees the propaganda, and it doesn't matter if it's the enemy side or her side. It's still causing an effect on her. There's still like that's like the last little amount of brainwashing that she has to like overcome in the situation. and
Mhm.
takes a few shots before for doing that.
Well, it's fear. I mean, I guess it could be brainwashing, but the fear is real. That's very visceral. So, I mean, we don't know who was on what side. So, like, to me, it was that, her fear was that he was just waiting for the right moment to destroy her. And that's where her sort of impulsive, like offense came from and scaring him off. So, but there's more confusion on her side than there was on his side. And I wonder if that has to do with the language barrier because he's talking a lot more. He's trying to communicate with her and she's reluctant to speak. And then it seems like maybe she doesn't because she doesn't have the tools to communicate with him. And that's what makes it such an interesting story of the nonverbal communication.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I am wondering, like, with this, and also that was a bit of genius in the prologue, just to be like, hey, maybe the signs aren't in English, or so we really don't know whose town is because they suggest that you're not actually seeing the correct language on the signs in the prologue, so
That's true. That's
so,
true.
so that is a nice way to really just make it a little bit confusing. So, I mean, hey, could have been a civil war, could both be their town for all we well, okay, the language gap would be a problem there, but
No, that's a good point, though.
yeah, I actually I'm gonna go ahead and say it probably is a two political entity situation and not necessarily a civil war because that would make less sense. But that can happen in some places for sure. So again, they don't. I guess that's the part of where you don't know where this is either. So
Or when.
yeah, I don't. Is this a proper Twilight Zone episode? There's nothing trippy. We have a writer and director who is not a regular. It does feel like now this is of course produced for the Twilight Zone and everything, but in season 5 they're gonna grab a French production for Occurrence at Owl Creek, and this almost kind of feels like a similar vibe where it's just coming from somewhere else. Like it's a little too sci-fi for say an Alfred Hitchcock Presents or something, but yeah.
Mhm. Well, if the last episode was in June and this one is in September, that's not a ton of space in between. So maybe like Sterling just wanted another episode off, like to extend his summer, and then he's gonna come back. Maybe it's like a guest starring.
Yeah,
Um, you
yeah.
know.
Just because we do have 3 or 4 other regular writers for Twilight Zone, and this is not one of them, which makes this
Mhm.
a just a bit of an anomaly. I mean, which is an interesting way to look at it and an interesting way to start your seasons for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is interesting.
This should have been season episode 2. Honestly, I don't know. I besides just the yeah, episode 2 should be 2. I do wonder if the arrival, which I've already done the podcast on, would make a more sensible season opener. But I guess nobody cares what opens the season in 1961 that much. So
Probably by the third season. I mean, maybe this was the right opportunity to throw something else in there because their following was so consistent by then to have two solids, and these are long seasons, a 29 episode season for the second one, and I can't remember how many were in the first one, but this is in the days when seasons were not 10 episodes, they were a lot of work. So not that 10 episodes can't be a lot of work, but you know what I mean? Like that was just a different standard of how many episodes would be making up a season in early television versus now.
and Serlin was definitely getting run down by season 3. So he was very overworked. I think this is about the point where he spent most of his time on the East Coast teaching writing classes and screaming scripts into his dictaphone and then just flying to the West, shooting a bunch of intros and going back to the East Coast. So
That's interesting. That might have more of an influence than I thought to research outside of the episode itself.
did you have any other big notes on your papers?
Let's see. Um, I'm just going to mention that, this is neither here nor there, but Montgomery did get top billing. And then Bronson got the which when you only have two people, you can have one get top billing and one get the So it worked out perfectly. But, in terms of where they were in their careers, Bronson had a longer career because he had a longer life by about 20 years. But this was about a decade into her career. So I thought that was interesting that she got that billing. And then as we discussed in a couple more years, then she would be on Bewitched and that would be what she would ultimately be probably most known for these days.
I mean, this is definitely one of the more like star-struck Twilight Zone episodes. Not as much as like, oh, that's a Shatner episode, but yeah, it's definitely oh, there's two actors we definitely know in this one. Well, at least film geeks know. I think everyone knows Charles Bronson, and people know Bewitched. So yeah, people know him, but I don't know if you just shouted Elizabeth Montgomery at someone on the street, they'd pick up on it. But if you showed them a picture of Bewitched, they'd get it. You know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the fun things about this episode is seeing two people that you do not see together in any other situation and in this story and this time. So yeah, it was a fun episode. And yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, I guess I'll bring it to an end then, and tell the listeners it's Time Enough Podcast on Twitter and Facebook, and you can support us uh, at our Patreon, Podcastius, where you get episodes early. I've started doing occasional chats here and there with some folks there, and you can also hear our other podcasts such as Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary, the Occult Disney podcast, Imprisoned in Prison, about the 60s TV show The Prisoner, and some video game stuff with Luke Loves Pokemon, Monster Mash about Monster Hunter, and the Game Show. Woo! Okay, yeah, the plug has just gotten so long. Yeah. I see where you start to hate yourself when you do it week to week. Okay, well, I'm gonna go bop around the town and see if I find anybody. There's got to be at least one person out there.